Good afternoon, Jacob Gluck,
Good afternoon, Marty.
the eminent biblical historian and scholar.
I'm not that eminent.
Okay,
But thank you.
I have a question today I want to ask you about King David. Tell me about the historicity of King David in historically and in the Bible and how it came to be.
It's a very, very good question. It's actually funny that you're asking this because for traditional people, it's not even a question. Well, of course, David is just as fact as Moses, who is just as fact as Hezekiah, who lived 200-300 years later. There's no distinction between the three of such characters. But in fact, there has been a lot of debate recently, in recent decades, specifically in the last, I think, 10, 15 years, about the history of David. I think, from my knowledge, it is a book called, what is it called? I forgot already. But it's authored by Neil Asher Silverman and Neil Asher Silverman and what's the name? Finkelstein? Yeah, Finkelstein. What's his first name?
The Bible Unearthed?
Right, the Bible Unearthed, thank you. Okay, so Finkelstein basically is the one who first to tackle this question of the history of David. What he says is that he's obviously an archaeologist, so he conducted a lot of digs, and what they found is that the south, meaning the area where David was supposedly the monarch, right? He ruled in the south, and his dynasty was centered in the south. And so what they found is that Judea wasn't in a state what he calls in a state of state formation. That's the term he uses. In other words, there is a certain level of sophistication that society requires in order to reach a level of being able to write and having certain institutions, etc. And there wasn't such a state formation stage reached at the time the Bible purports David to have the peak of his reign, which is essentially the 10th century, right? So the 10th century and maybe David is supposed to have lived between about 1040 to 1010 BC, those years. And so historically, archaeologically, this is not borne out. Okay, so he's not saying that David didn't exist, but what he is saying is that David, as described in the Bible, is hardly a plausible proposition, because at the time, from what we find archaeologically, Judea wasn't in a developed state as of yet, and it couldn't support this sophisticated entrapments of royalty as described. For example, it says that David, first of all, he ruled the north, and the north is known to have been a much wealthier kingdom. And how does a southern outlying provincial district, right, and its capital Jerusalem, how does that become a capital of a united monarchy that controls the north, which is a much wealthier district? So that's a huge problem that is difficult to answer if you're trying to adopt the traditional view. And so essentially his belief is, he has a radical belief here, which I'm a little skeptical about, but essentially what his conclusion from this is that all the attributions about the sophistication of David's regime is a late phenomenon. Okay, it was trumpeted up in something like the 8th and 7th century, specifically the 7th century, at a time when the northern kingdom had already been destroyed and exiled, right? They were gone. And at this point, there were many exiles from the north. After 722 BC, there were many exiles who surged south because they wanted some level of identity, of national identity. And since it was completely destroyed in the north, so the only way they can find something to latch onto that is close enough to them was the south. I say close enough because it was vastly different. Okay, before 722 BC, there was a very distinct different empires. There was the Northern Empire. I should call it empire. I should simply say kingdom. There wasn't really an empire. But there was the North and the South. But after 722, when the Northern Kingdom dissolved, so their only option was to either lose completely their identity or to try to find the closest thing available to them. So at that point, Judea assumed this new vibrancy, never before seen in its history. And at that point, they rewrote history. They rewrote history in a way to make it seem that their dynasty is the God had been prosperous and ruling all along, right?
Predicted.
Right. And also that God had promised that there was a covenant, the Davidic covenant, right, that this dynasty will continue forever. And the Northerners would have went along. This was a little, more than a little, but this would have been, what's the word I'm looking for? This would have been disparaging or belittling for somebody. I mean, on the surface, it would seem that if somebody from the North, this would seem like self-degrading, like for them to accept that the South had been the more prosperous kingdom all along, which wasn't factually true. But the Northerners went along with this. The reason they went along with this is because they...
And the only reason the Northerners got the kingdom in the first place was because the Southerners sinned. They explain in the Kings that the reason why the Southerners got the Davidic kingdom that belongs to the South is only because the Southerners sinned.
The Southerners...
Solomon,
right.
Or Solomon sinned.
Right. So at any rate, at that point, the reason why this became such a prominent theme in the Deuteronomic history...
Deuteronomistic.
Thank you. There's actually a very subtle difference. Deuteronomic means relating to Deuteronomy. Deuteronomistic is like...
is the whole history.
Right. So the Deuteronomistic history, the reason it became such an important theme is because the Deuteronomy was written... it was written after the fall of the Northern Kingdom, and therefore, at that point, they completely reevaluated and rewrote and reformulated the historical consciousness of the nation to be in step with the new reality, which is that the Davidic kingdom is the only one that has survived, and the only one that has the potential, right? That has the promise of becoming the true embodiment of God's covenant with the Israelites.
Okay, so what? How does that? So David. So what's?
So the bottom line is like this. So who was David in reality? He was a petty chieftain. He was a petty warrior. He had a band of several dozen,
and the
maybe
South
several
comes
hundred.
from him, actually, or
yeah. No, he is a historical person in the sense that
in Jerusalem
that
he
it
was.
Is likely. I say likely. I don't have proof. There is very little proof for this. There is some. He does appear in some archaeological inscriptions, but it's controversial. Some people. There is the Beit David inscription, the Tel Dan. It says something. The Tel Dan inscription, right? Meaning an inscription that was found in Tel Dan, which is the north of Israel. It was found in 1994, I believe, and it mentions something Bith Dawid, the house of David. But this is controversial because some scholars don't agree that this is actually what it says. The inscription isn't clear. Okay, it's a little right. So the actual archaeological evidence for a distinct person called David is a little weak, but yet I will still grant that he is likely to have existed. However, the way he's described in the Bible, that's inaccurate. So what was he in reality? He was a petty chieftain, right? He was a fighter, and for the most part, in the beginning, he fought alongside the North, because the North obviously was a more prosperous and more successful kingdom. So in the beginning, he somehow tried to create some alliance with the northern king, who is Saul. That alliance broke down, because remember, the south was like its own province. The south wasn't really part of the tribal alliance that was the north, even in those early days. Okay, if you look, for example, in the Shirat Devorah, like the Song of Deborah, which is one of the earliest pieces of literature in the Bible, it's important to note, and so in that song, there's mention of all the tribes of Israel, but Yehuda doesn't appear there. So this is actually an extremely important little factoid here, because this shows that in the early times, Yehuda was not part of the tribal confederation. So in the beginning, there was some effort made to try to incorporate them into the tribal federation, but that failed, because why did it fail? It's not exactly clear. There are many stories in the Bible how David and Saul didn't get along, but obviously they tried to consolidate that with a marriage, because that was pretty common in those days, to try to seal a a political alliance through marriage. But that didn't work out. So ultimately, what happened is that after Saul died, is he didn't have any talented and capable successors, and David became very strong, and this was unpredictable. Okay, nobody had foreseen this because, like I said, the southern kingdom was weak, and so we don't know exactly what transpired at this point. But it would seem that in the absence of a strong leader for the north, the Davidic kingdom of the south somehow assumed ascendancy. I think that this is my version of events. So I do believe that subsequent to the death of Saul, something happened which allowed the unthinkable to happen, which is that the southern, less prosperous district would assume ascendancy.
So the temple is a completely Davidic invention, or
the temple wasn't built by David. According to the Bible, it was built by Solomon. Right. But some critics would even argue it was built even later than Solomon.
So the north never had a temple like they had in Jerusalem?
The north did not have a temple, right. The north never had a temple as in Jerusalem, but they had not as magnificent as a temple in Jerusalem.
Right.
But they had their temple. They had one in Dan and one in Bethel. That's what the Bible tells us, that Jeroboam, that's one of the early projects when he seceded from the southern Davidic kingdom.
That became a sin to bring sacrifices to that one.
So the earliest thing, the first thing that he did was, religion was tied up with politics back then. So the only way to completely solidify his grasp on power was to create independent, autonomous centers of worship. So he created one on the southern border of his kingdom, which is Bethel, and one in the north, and Dan. What exactly those sanctuaries were made of, we don't know. I would guess that they were made. They were not tents. Okay, not like the Mishkan, like the tabernacle. They were more sophisticated than that. But we don't know exactly what the.
Because they were destroyed.
Yeah, exactly. They were destroyed. This is 722 BC. Remember, the northern kingdom was completely decimated by 722, and this is a relatively early date in history. And so we don't know. We don't have. Maybe there are certain things that have been uncovered in archaeological diggings, but I'm not aware of anything.
Wow, thank you, Jacob. This was so informative.
Thank you.